Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my daughter and co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
Well, Heidi, substance abuse has been such, and dying of substance abuse and everything that's been going on in the country. And we've got some experts on, and we've got somebody who's lived through the experience. And we're really going to try to give you some advice and thoughts on how to help yourself after you've had a loss.
Absolutely, Mom. And the word substance abuse can be very stigmatized. And I've learned a lot from our guests today. So we are going to be calling this show Coping with a Substance-Related Death.
And we might want to talk about why people don't want to use substance abuse with these folks now.
Absolutely, because we've got three professionals with us. So we are going to be talking today with Glen Lord, Tanya Lord, Dr. Tanya Lord, and Judy Mandel. So let me start with Glen because he's on the end. Glen is a bereaved dad, brother, and son who lost both parents and a grandmother who helped raise him. He runs SADOD, which stands for Support After a Death by Overdose Project, an organization that provides resources and assistance to those who have been affected by a loved one from a substance-related cause. He is the founder and CEO of Peer Support Community Partners and the co-creator of the River Peer Support Model and co-founder of the Grief Toolbox. Welcome, Glen.
Thank you.
And next to him is Dr. Tanya Lord. It's no coincidence that they have the same last names because they are actually married also. So Dr. Tanya Lord is a bereaved daughter and a bereaved parent whose 4-year-old son Noah died after a tonsillectomy. She is the co-director of SADOD, Support After Death by Overdose, the co-founder of the Grief Toolbox, co-creator of the River Peer Support Model, and directs patient and family engagement processes for the New Hampshire hospital system. Welcome, Tanya. And then next to Tanya is Judy Mandel. And Judy is a bereaved sibling and aunt.
And we've had Judy on before.
As we have Tanya and Glen.
Yes.
Every one of these guests have been on before.
That's right. And I wanted to say with Judy, we had her on for her book on replacement child.
Yes.
Because as you'll see a little later, they had an experience early on in their years ago where an airplane hit the house and one of your sisters was killed and the other one was burned. And it's her daughter we're going to be talking about.
Yes.
The one who was injured before you were born. Right. So we'll be talking about that. So I just wanted to
give a little backstory.
Yeah.
So Judy, as you said, is the author of a new memoir, and this is called White Flag, which chronicles her struggle to save her beloved niece and fulfill a deathbed promise she made to her sister. She is a former reporter and marketing executive. Her first book, as you mentioned, Replacement Child, was a New York Times bestseller, and she has co-founded the Replacement Child Forum. Welcome back, Judy.
Thank you. It's great to have you on. We wanted to show a little clip about Cheryl, your niece, before we got started in talking about your journey with her. So Judy, I wanted to talk, your book is White Flag. Can you talk a little bit why you called it that to start?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's really threefold, the reasons that I named it White Flag. First, it was the way I found a bed for my niece when she was homeless in Louisville. It was very cold that winter. And they have an event called White Flag Event when the weather gets inclement and they have to let people in even if they don't have a real bed. So that was the way she found a bed at the Salvation Army. And I think the more meaningful reason is that people with substance use disorder need to raise their own white flag before that they need help, that they need help from the outside. And if they don't do that, it's really nothing that you can do for them. And that's actually the other part of the white flag, is that I had to raise my own, that what I could do and what I couldn't do.
Yeah, and a little backstory about Cheryl, and talk a little bit about how you got into trying to help her.
Sure. And as you were starting to say, Cheryl is the daughter of my sister who was badly injured in that plane crash in 1952. And as I started to do more research into substance use disorder, I understood transgenerational trauma and how that doesn't go away, that it's part of you and who you are. And as my sister, Linda, who was Cheryl's mother, she passed away from lung cancer. And as she was dying, I said, don't worry, I've got your girls. It's okay. You know, and Cheryl, of course, was her oldest. And that meant when she was in trouble, I wanted to be there for her. I needed to.
And then how did your journey begin? How did you...
Well, she had disappeared. I didn't know where she was. And it was like 2 years I hadn't seen her. And it was my sister's birthday, and I decided I would Google Cheryl's name. And a mugshot came up when at jail. She was in jail, in prison in Ohio. And even though I was distraught that she was in prison, I was very happy she was alive, because I didn't think she was. I knew she had problems with drugs, and I was afraid she was gone.
Right.
Because that would be what would happen. So when I found her, I wrote to the jail, and I had her prisoner number, and I could write to her. And finally, I did receive a letter back. It took a couple of weeks. And we kept in touch while she was in jail, and then after, and that's actually when this story starts in the book.
Of dealing with her.
And how many years did you help her? Did you try to help her, or did you help her?
Well, she was in prison for a little under 2 years, and we corresponded the whole time. I went to see her when she got out, and we kept in touch for a while, and then she broke it off. And then I found her again when her sister wrote to me and said she's in trouble. And, you know, that the last couple of months were when she was really struggling. And I, tried to help her.
Yeah, of course.
I tried to help her, but it didn't work. And that's my white flag. If I did what I could.
And how old was she when she died?
42.
Wow.
And drugs started very early in her life.
Does this sound familiar to y'all over there? And
Yes, you mentioned, Tanya mentioned our son, or who died in her introduction. We have another son who is actively struggling with substance use disorder, and currently he's in an active chaotic addictive mode, so he's regularly using both meth and Valium off and on at this point in time, so we're very familiar with that journey.
And you think that you're going to be able to help them early on? Did you feel like...
There were so many things I didn't know, and that I learned later about why she could say to me that she wants to stop, she's doing this to stop, she's doing that to stop. But she didn't have the capacity to do that when I found brain chemistry changes, when you're using drugs, and certainly when you start young, as she did as a teenager, it's cumulative. So it takes even longer for that to reverse. So she didn't really have the capacity. And I mean, there's this metaphor that meant a lot to me when I was reading, in that you're careening down a hill, in a car, and you're pounding on the brakes, but the brakes don't work. And that made me understand a little more about why she wanted to stop but couldn't.
I like that metaphor, because you hear the idea of just say no,
Right.
just stop, and it's not that. It's not easy. It's not that simple.
It's not.
Our son really came personally to light for me on Christmas Day about 3 years ago. He had been with us, and he'd been with us for a couple hours, and that's about the extent of the time he's able to be with us. And he wanted to go out, and I looked at him and said, please just stay with us. And I wanted him to just stay. And he looked back with tears in his eyes, and he said, Dad, I don't want to go either. and proceeded to walk out the door. Just like you say, that it's not them. They don't have the disease is there, and he did not want to go.
Yeah.
But his disease did, and his disease was in control. And so that's what happened.
Yeah, Tanya, what's your thought on it? Hearing the story, and I know you've worked with a lot of families where there's been the loss. How do you deal with it, with the guilt? And what do you recommend?
One of the pieces, and I don't know if it's Al-Anon or one of the slogans that is tossed around is, I didn't cause it, I can't control it, and I can't cure it. And, when I first heard it, I tend to shy away from cliche sounding things. But truthfully, with the families that we partner with, work with, is just such an important piece of understanding that there isn't, it's beyond our ability at times to help. And just, so the guilt that comes in, is really, I think, just what I hear from people, and the way I look at it is understanding that you do the best that you can in impossible situations. And I'm sure you're in situations that you would never have been able to imagine that you were in, trying to deal with the circumstances, trying to handle, what kind of resources are available, how can, it's just a constant advice from everybody and their brother of what you should or shouldn't be doing. And so in the end, when the disease wins over and people die, and they're dying by the thousands in this country, it's the people left behind just to know that they aren't to blame for it. That we say things sometimes, like people talk about enabling. If you buy them a pizza or give them $10, that you're enabling the drug addiction or the drug use. But truthfully, if I had the control to cause that, if I could enable drug use, I could stop it. I would have that control as well. And so there's a huge amount of guilt, but it's not, we do the best we
The
can.
enabling thing, is a trigger for me, because people would say to me, well, you're doing this, you're doing that, you're enabling her. I was keeping her alive. To, that's what I was doing. I wasn't enabling.
Right.
I think that's a, word, if you love this person, you want to keep them alive.
Right.
Until maybe they,
Yes.
and they do raise their white flag.
Yeah.
Yes.
And get some
So
help.
it sounds like that's a really good distinction. There's a lot of judgment from
Huge.
outsiders, and I know when we first, thought about the show, we were going to say substance abuse, and both Tanya and Judy said no. That's a word that's very stigmatized, right? It's stigmatizing to say that.
It is. And I think just changing that language takes the shame away. And maybe they realize, well, I'm still the person you love, and you still want to help me, and you're not saying I'm an addict and there's no hope for me and I'm not worth helping. That's what that word brings
Oh,
up.
interesting. Yeah. So what do families need when they've had somebody die of a substance-related death?
What do they need? You probably can answer that a little better from
I don't think there's a single thing that people need. So let's
Alright.
start there. People's grief journeys are all unique. But I think it's really the same things that, in many ways, they need to be in a safe environment where it's all right to talk about what the reality of their journey. Oftentimes, I've been in peer grief groups with people who have had someone whose child has died by substance use, And they'll just be very vague about the way that their child died because they don't feel safe. They feel like if they say their child died by substance use, then their child's death is going to be diminished, or their loved one's death. And, I don't want to speak just about child loss. Their loved one's death is going to be diminished because it's kind of like, okay, well, somehow they were responsible for that. They made that happen, as opposed to, no, it was a disease, and they died from a horrible disease, and this disease took their lives. And so I think to provide that safe environment for them is one of the things. And then I think beyond that, it's the same thing that is in any peer grief support that works. It's what we call the river model, which is relate, invite, validate, empower, and reassure. And it doesn't occur in that order. It's just a mnemonic to remember it by. But I think that's what people need when they're grieving, to find their hope again, is an environment where it's safe and you can do that for them.
Well, I think that you've said peer support. That's really important. One of the things that we know in the whole grief and loss world, not just in drug and alcohol abuse, is the two factors that have been found research to be most helpful is peer support and information. And I think that's one of the problems. Sometimes we either don't find peers, we tend to go to the experts in the field or whatever, rather than, that's why AA is so successful, because it's real peer support and going in. But also information. Sometimes you can get with people who don't have the correct information. I mean, they may say something to you like, well, my friend did tough love and it worked for her.
Right.
Or something like that. The information's not correct. So
these are stigmatized losses.
Yeah.
My father-in-law died of cirrhosis, and he was a wonderful man. You can die of cirrhosis and be a wonderful man.
Sure.
These two things can exist together. And in the hospital, he told my husband, the doctors told my husband, your father deserves to die because he's drank himself to death.
Yes.
I think that stigmatized loss is why peer support is so important in this specifically. And I encourage people to find groups that focus on substance use related deaths because of that stigma. I mean, I have not been treated, because my son uses drugs, I'm treated poorly by a lot of people in a lot of different situations. And I think that even what you said, the idea that we have to, the people who've had a loss from substance use feel the need to say they were a good person. Well, of course they were a good person. Our son was 4 when he died. Nobody asks us to justify that he was a good person and therefore shouldn't have died, right, or didn't deserve to die. But there is something about substance use, and especially chaotic use, that people see. There's just so much judgment around it. And it's like, when we look around at people are coping the best they can in this world. My weight is a coping mechanism for this world. So do I deserve to die because I use food in a way that other people don't? Somebody who uses drugs in another way or a different way than others they don't deserve the judgment. And so when somebody dies, as Glenn said, that the obituaries don't talk about, it's not spoken about often because it's a judged death, or people are like, well, as if people aren't grieving that person.
I actually had a big fight with my family about the obituary for Cheryl, and because I wanted to say it, and one of the members of the family, which I won't say who, didn't want to say that. Then they'll know it was, she was using drugs, and I wanted to have a donation made to, and they wouldn't have that either. So yes, it follows, and it follows from how they were treated themselves. So it follows through to the family when they pass away.
So you wanted to build some awareness.
I did
about it,
and I still do.
Right. Well, Glenn and Tanya, I wanted you to talk a little bit about what's happening nationally as how drug companies are having to finance some of the rehab that's going on, correct?
Yeah, I can talk about that for a second. I just want to make an invitation, though, for what we were just talking about. One of the pieces we have is something called Honoring the Many, and it's a memorial site that I invite everyone who has someone who's died by substance use-related causes to share their loved one there, because the concept is that they lived, and it's about sharing their life. And I think it's a lot easier to stigmatize a number than it is to stigmatize a face and a person and a life. And as you talked about with your father-in-law, every single one of these people who've died, they were wonderfully loved, cared people who did amazing things in this world, who happened to die by substance use-related causes.
And where do people go to find this?
At honoringthemany.org. And
honoringthemany.org.
Yeah, please,
Okay.
and
I
you're
love
invited
this.
to share. We have hundreds of people who have already shared their loved one, and we invite you to share yours there too. Yes, I mean the opioid settlements are a complicated thing, and there's lots of settlements that are out there, and I think that there's the settlements monies are going in a variety of different things. The big thing that I would say is that I think as a country we learned a lot from the tobacco settlements. Most people don't know that most of the money that came from the tobacco settlements did nothing to do with mitigating the effects of tobacco. The substance use related settlements, which are coming from a variety of different places and are going to the states' attorneys generals and being distributed back out through the states, really are mandated that they have specific effects on the opioid crisis. Now that could be everything. It could be anything from working on recovery. It could be working with grief. It's very broad, but it has to be specifically focused on the opioid challenges. So that's being administered and in your state. If you contact your attorney general, they can provide information to you about the methodologies, because it's very different state by state, the methodology that they are that they are distributing it out and working with. But if you contact your attorney general's office, they can give you details in your state.
The reason I wanted to bring that up is because we have found that one of the things that helps people move in a healing direction is often volunteer work or working in that area. So there are some things going on that you might be able to find out about that you can volunteer to do, or start something in your own state.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There are a lot of coalitions now for harm reduction we were talking about before, and that's a place where I intend to.
And you have a lot of
Volunteer, too.
information in your book about
do,
places
yeah.
that you can go
I do.
and things that you can do. So I think proactive with their memory is a wonderful thing.
There is a big need still nationally to have other peer grief group facilitators that focus on substance use, deaths, and there's training for that. We have some, but there's just a need to kind of gather together the people who have had a similar loss.
There's one group you probably know of called GASP.
Grasp, I believe.
GRASP, right. Grief recovery after substance passing, right?
Yeah.
Which is another kind of same kind of group.
Absolutely, yes.
So if I'm struggling right now, I'm listening to this and I'm still feeling the guilt, the shame. It's kind of interesting because when my son was killed in an automobile accident, and I'm sure when Noah died of his tonsillectomy, you do feel guilt and shame as a parent that you can take care of them, or as an aunt or whatever, or as a sister. It should have been me, survival guilt. There are all sorts of complicated things that go into this. So even with a loss with substance, there's got to be that same guilt and shame. Do you know what I mean? As a parent, it comes in. So I think it's important to think about that. Maybe to normalize it a little bit, if you possibly can.
Saying that guilt and shame is part of the process.
Part of losing a close family member.
For me, the understanding how complex it was helped me quite a bit. To understand, in my case, it was a combination of generational trauma and depression that she suffered from, and just brain chemistry change. It was really more than I could handle.
Yeah. So being able to frame it in some way to look at the picture.
And there's one piece that doesn't get talked a lot about, and I think because of the guilt and shame, is that for people who have lost somebody they love to substance use, and has been, some people have struggled for many, many, many years and been in and out, just the stuff you've described, that there is sometimes a sense of relief, much like, it's a chronic illness. It's
Right.
a chronic disease,
Right.
much like people who have watched somebody struggle with cancer and at the end feel like, okay, they are now free of the pain of the struggle. This is not, our younger son took years to understand that this was not his brother partying too much. This is a deep, deep struggle for the people who are using drugs chaotically. And I think, when you're with people who understand that and you have that safety to say it, and I just think that's important because
Right.
for people who aren't in a group or aren't connected with peers, feeling that's a very uncomfortable feeling, to feel a
Right.
sense of relief, even as you're grieving
Right,
the
that's
person.
a good point. Now tell us where we find you guys.
Well, we're a variety of different places, so I will list them all, but the SADOD project is sadod.org, and there's contact information for me there, so you can find me there.
Okay, how about you, Tanya? Do you
Same
wanna-
with me.
All right, and Judy, where can people get your book?
JudyMandel.com. You can find me, and my book is anywhere that books are sold.
Have you got one last comment for people who've had suffering a loss of a loved one?
I think just that if it's their life they lived, and you talked about it. We were earlier when we were watching a different show being filmed, and I think the big comment I would say is their life mattered.
I love it. And Tanya?
That no matter how dark it feels, you're not alone.
Thank you. And Judy?
And remember who they were. They weren't just their substance use disorder. They were the same person that you always loved.
Thank you so much for being on the show, all of you. You're amazing, and for your candidness. It was wonderful.
I agree. Thank you. And this is an issue that I'm so glad we're addressing, because this has been, the numbers are getting bigger and bigger and bigger about these kind of losses.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
And thanks everybody for joining us on the show today. And Heidi and I know all of our guests want to remind you that if you've lost hope, please lean on ours until you find your own, and God bless.
The loss of a loved one can leave you feeling depressed, angry, alone, lost. But you don't have to face this journey on your own. Open to Hope is a free community for anyone who has experienced loss. Find support. Find help. Find hope. Give grief a voice at opentohope.com.